Hello everyone, welcome to Easy Economics. How are you all doing? I hope you all are doing good. Today I brought for you all February March 2025 0455 Variant 22 Section B. We'll be doing all the questions in this section in order to have an idea how to answer questions that appeared in this variant. All right, so let's move to question number 2. If you look at the right hand side, I've provided in the solutions, and the left hand side displays the question paper. All right. Question number 2. Question number 2 says South Korea makes use of both economic goods and free goods. Its output includes products with both elastic and inelastic supply. The country is building the world's first floating city, estimated to cost around $180 million. This is to cope with rising sea levels caused by climate change. Governments take a number of measures to reduce greenhouse gases, which contribute to climate change, including the banning of burning of wood to heat homes. So now they've given us a piece of information regarding South Korea that it's trying to build the world's first floating city. And in order to ensure everything to be smooth, it's trying to cut down. Instead, it's banning the use of wood in order to heat homes. And it's taking a number of measures to combat climate changes, right? Protect the environment. Now, the first part, it's of 2 marks. And in this part, they have asked us to identify one difference between economic goods and free goods. That's a 2-mark question. So if you look at the right-hand side, I have written 3 differences between these 2 key terms, economic goods and free goods. Now, what you can do is you can pick any one of them in order to make a comparison, in order to draw a difference. For instance, you could say economic good is a product which requires resources to produce it, whereas free goods are goods which do not require any resources to produce them. Or you could say economic goods are goods which are limited in supply, whereas free goods are goods which are unlimited in supply. Or you could say economic goods are goods which have an opportunity cost in order to produce them, whereas free goods are goods which do not have an opportunity cost. So pick out any one difference, make a comparison between the 2, and you're good to go and you'll get 2 marks. All right? Now, part B. Part B says, explain how opportunity cost will influence a government's decision on whether to spend tax revenue on a large infrastructure project. Now, they are asking us, how would a government decide on whether it should be spending on a large infrastructure project? So, how would it make use of, how would opportunity cost be influencing a government decision? This is what you've got to explain. It's a 4-mark question. So, how will we go about answering this question? First, we'll define what is opportunity cost. Then we'll answer this part. So, first, we all know, we'll say opportunity cost is the cost of the best alternative foregone due to a particular choice made. Now we'll say that the tax revenue that the government has is limited in supply. If the government decides to spend it on the construction of, now you can give an example of any large infrastructure project. For instance, over here, I have mentioned a flyover. You could say an airport. You could say maybe roads, right? Hospitals. So if the government decides to spend it on the construction of a flyover, or let's say an airport, it will have little or no tax revenue left to provide for the provision of maybe unemployment benefits or subsidies to a particular industry, right? Whatever it decides, it depends on its priorities. It depends on how and what issues matters the government the most, right? So it depends on its list of priorities, what macroeconomic objectives it wishes to achieve, right? That's the answer. You mentioned that, full 4 marks. All right. Part C. Now, part C is an analyzed question. Now, in an analyzed question, how will you go about answering the question? Let's look at first what's the question is asking us. The question says, analyze the difference between, analyze the influences on whether supply of a product is elastic or inelastic. Now, it's a 6-mark question. you have got to decide on what are the determinants that affect or that tells you whether the supply of a product is inelastic or inelastic. So over here, we are going to be deciding upon the determinants of supply. All right. So first, we'll go about explaining what is price elasticity of supply. We'll say price elasticity of supply is a measure of the responsiveness of the quantity supplied to a change in price. How responsive the supply is to changes in price, right? So percentage change in supply, or price elasticity of supply is what? Percentage change in quantity supplied divided by percentage change in price. So the supply is said to be elastic if the change in quantity supplied is more than the change in price. When the quantity supplied changes by a greater percentage than the change in price, it's said to be elastic, and in that scenario, elasticity of supply has to be greater than 1. The value for elastic supply would be greater than 1. It would said to be inelastic if the change in quantity supplied is lesser than the change in price. So when the quantity supplied changes by a smaller percentage than the change in price, elasticity of supply is said to be inelastic, and it has to be less than 1. It has to be less than 1. Now, in order to ascertain whether the supply of product will be elastic or inelastic, it depends upon the time taken to produce it. If a product can be manufactured quickly, or the cost of altering its supply is low, that means you can quickly correspond to changes in supply, you can quickly respond to changes in increase in supply, so then the supply of that product is said to be elastic. Or if the firm has unused resources, if the firm has stocks of unused raw materials or unused supplies, it has got spare capacity, it has got workers, it has got raw materials, it has got the key inputs required to manufacture the product quickly and quickly respond to increases in supply, increases in demand, right? So what it can be in that scenario, the supply of the product would be what? Elastic, right? What about feasibility of storage? Yes, if it's not a perishable product, a product that does not rot, or you can easily store it. There's no issues or there's no protocols needed to store that product. It's easier. So you can quickly respond to changes in price, right? So in that scenario also, the supply of the product is said to be elastic. Or when factors of production can be easily moved between production processes. That means maybe from the production of t-shirts, now if there, you can correspond to changes in price quickly. And now you can swap those inputs towards the production of, let's say, formal shirts, from t-shirts to shirts, right? So the mobility of factors is high. So in that scenario also, the elasticity would be what? Would be elastic, right? The supply would be elastic. The level of competition again also plays an important role. If it's going to be a monopoly, then the supply of goods is going to be relatively inelastic. However, if the level of competition is high, there are lots of firms operating, right? So then it's easier to respond to changes in price, and supply can be quickly increased if there are multiple suppliers in the market. However, if it's dominated by a single monopoly producer, then in that scenario, the supply of goods would be relatively inelastic. So these are the factors that needs to be written in this analyze question. I hope it's clear. Part D. Part D, it's a discuss question. It's an 8 marker. And what are they asking us? They are asking us to discuss whether or not a government should ban the burning of wood to heat homes. Now they are asking us, should the government go about banning, right? It's a complete no on the consumption, on the usage of wood in order to heat homes. So if we say yes, a government should go about banning the burning of woods in order to heat homes, in order to reduce the level of pollution, and in order to protect the environment, and in order to meet sustainable environmental goals, right? In order to protect the environment and safeguard people's health, It's a wise decision of the government to put a ban on the usage of wood in order to heat homes. Wood is being extracted from trees and it takes years for trees to grow. It's one of the most precious natural resource, right? So in order to save trees, it's a good move. And instead of using wood to heat homes, the government can start the initiative of a move towards more other environmental friendly or eco friendly alternatives, which could be cheaper and even environmental friendly at the same time. For instance, what? Solar or gas alternatives, right? However, you could say that no, a complete ban on the usage of wood to heat homes could create unemployment for those who are associated with these industries. For people who are employed in these industries who would be facing unemployment, and those who are already at the poverty level or those who are poor, it's been seen that wood is being used to heat homes by those who are poverty stricken, right? Who have a low income level. So if you put a ban to on the consumption of wood in order to heat homes. So those who are already poverty stricken or those who are already on a low income band, they would be facing a lot of problems because other alternatives are relatively expensive. And it's been seen that wood is being used by the poor. So it could be that they might find it difficult to switch, or it might put a strain on their already low incomes, right? They are already finding it difficult to make their ends meet. So they would be having or going through increased pressure, increased financial crunch, right? Or it could be that the other alternatives are more polluted, would cause more pollution, or would be more expensive, and they might not find it easy to switch. So instead of putting a complete ban, what should be the conclusion? That you could say that yes, a government may consider banning the burning of wood to heat homes since it increases air pollution, and yes, it causes deforestation. This way, it can meet sustainable environmental objectives and reduce health problems. But since wood is a relatively cheap source of heating, so households earning relatively low income or those who are heavily dependent on it will be negatively affected, right? So instead of a complete ban, the government can make regulations, right? It can either promote cleaner burning stoves or it could give subsidies to switch to cleaner energy like solar or electric, or it could adopt a more balanced approach considering the economic impact on households, right? So you need to find a way out in order to have a balanced approach, right? All right. Question number 3. Let's read question number 3. Source first. It says Estonia's factors of production are employed in a range of industries, including education. In 2022, the country experienced a shortage of teachers. The government increased teachers' wages to attract workers from other industries. Two of Estonia's other industries are building and clothing. Estonia's clothing industry has firms of different sizes. Estonia's firms were affected in 2022 by the government increasing the money supply. Now, what are they telling us? They are saying that Estonia's factors of production are employed in various industries, and education is one of the industries in which most of its factors of production are employed. And the other two industries in which most of the factors of production are employed are housing, uh, it's building and clothing. Building, clothing, and education. And once it's experienced a shortage of teachers, what it did was it increased teachers' wages in order to attract workers from other industries. And it says its clothing firms have firms of different sizes, which means large to small. And Estonia's firms are affected when the government increased the money supply. Now, the first part is asking us to define factors of production. It's a 2-mark question. Now, I've listed, if you look at the right-hand side, I've provided in 2 definitions. You can use any one of the definition and you will be good to go. Easy 2 marks. Factor of production refers to economic resource used to produce goods and services, or these are inputs used in the production process. And we all know what are the factors of production: land, labor, capital, and enterprise, right? But here they ask us for the definition, so you need to put in the definition, right? Economic resource used to produce goods and services or inputs used in the production process. Use any one of them and you'll get 2 easy marks. Part B. Explain 2 reasons why building workers may not become teachers. Now it's a 4 mark question. Now they are asking us, why do you think workers who were initially employed in buildings, construction of houses or buildings, cannot become teachers? So 1 mark for the identification of the first reason, 1 mark for the explanation of that reason, the third mark for the identification of the second reason, and the final fourth mark for the explanation of the second reason. So now I've listed a lot of reasons. You can pick any two, build upon that, and you'll get full 4 marks. For instance, you could say building workers do not have the required academic qualifications, right? Or they do not have the training required to teach effectively. So in this scenario, they would be occupationally immobile. Or it could be that because of geographical immobility, they might not find it easier to switch their jobs. Maybe their residence is far away from the schools, or they find commutation a lot of issue, a lot of expense. It's getting expensive for them to commute every day from their house towards the schools. Maybe working in that building or that construction was close to their place, and now moving towards an educational job, the schools are located far away from the residence. So the commutation takes a lot of time and it's expensive at the same time, right? You could use any of these 2 reasons. Or you could say that maybe they're not satisfied with the working conditions being offered in schools and they're happy with their current jobs in the construction. Or they could say maybe they are unaware of the jobs available in the education sector. It's lack of information. They aren't aware of the available vacancies in the teaching sector. Or maybe they are not paid that high, like the jobs in construction, maybe because the jobs in the construction are more risky, so they are paid higher. And the wages they are being offered as a teacher is relatively low, which might not be attractive for them. Or you could say being a construction worker gives them more job satisfaction. So they are reluctant in order to switch their jobs or swap it, right? Choose any one of 2 of them, build upon it, give an reasonable explanation, and you'll be good to go with full 4 marks. I hope you are so far with me in your understanding. All right, part C. Part C says analyze how a small firm can compete successfully with a large firm in the same industry. Now they are saying there are 2 firms. One is small. And how do you think a small firm being in the same industry would be able to compete with a giant or with a large scale producer or a manufacturer or a service industry, provider of that same industry? So you could say it's a 6 mark question. Now, choose any 4 or more than 4, build upon it in order to get full 6 marks. It's an analyzed question. So you'll put a reason and then you'll develop that cause and effect relationship. You'll develop that chain link analysis. You'll build upon it. For instance, you could say being small in size could give a small firm the advantage to be flexible and respond quickly to changes consumer demands. So this means that since it's smaller in size, it could quickly changes to changes in demand and it could compete the large firm. Or it could be that being small in size, it could easily bring in innovative products, or maybe it has the availability of providing high quality products and services. Or maybe it enjoys customer loyalty because it's being close to consumers, being small, and it responds to changing consumer needs, and consumers find a sense of satisfaction by going into maybe that particular firm, right? Or it could be that maybe that producer provides customized services or tailor-made services or tailor-made goods or give a personalized touch to its products, right? So the customers derive a sense of satisfaction. Or it could be that though being small, its costs are low. And since it has to pay less taxes, so it enjoys high profit. And in this way, it's earning higher revenue and enjoying high profits, and it's able to compete that large firms. Or maybe it's enjoying a favorable location, the place where it's situated, it attracts more customers and it's able to compete the large manufacturer, right? Or large firms. Or maybe the relationship it has with its staff or its employees, it's very ideal, and the morale of staff is high and they enjoy being a part of that organization and they consider themselves a valuable asset, right? Maybe the remuneration being offered or the facilities, the workplace environment is very encouraging or highly motivating, and the staff is an added advantage, for which reasons why the small firm, though being small, is able to compete with the large firm. right? Because it provides them high quality services. All right. So you choose any four, build on that, and you'll be getting 6 marks. Now, D part of this question, it says discuss whether or not an increase in money supply will benefit an economy. Now, it's an 8 mark question. Now, we all know we need to produce in both sides of the argument and then conclude it with a well balanced conclusion, right? So you could say that yes, increasing in money supply would be beneficial for an economy because it boosts economic growth and it leads towards increase in aggregate demand since consumers will be spending more. Increasing money supply would cause a fall in interest rates, and as a result, aggregate supply would be increasing. And since interest rates are falling, so borrowing would be cheaper, and consumers would be able to get loans at cheaper rates. So it could be that spending would increase, right? So as a result, firms and businesses can expand and can they increase their production facilities and they can invest in their production facilities. They can provide more goods and services. As a result, they will be demanding more of labor and they will be employing more of factors of production. So the overall level of unemployment is going to fall and the level of employment level is going to rise. So when the employment level is going to rise, people are going to get better off. The standard of living is going to improve. The production level is going to rise. Productivity level is going to improve. The PPC curve of the economy is going to shift outwards. The unused resources would be now used and the productive potential of the economy is going to rise. And if there was unused or spare capacity, it's now going to be used and the country is going to making use of its productive potential and overall the standard of living and the GDP per head is going to improve. So the standard of living of the entire country is going to increase. The poverty level is going to reduce. However, it could be that no increasing money supply might not be beneficial because if the economy would have been at full potential, it could lead towards demand pull inflation, too much money chasing too few goods. Or it could be that increasing the money supply would lead towards an increase of imported items. So it could be that imported inflation might occur and it could cause a balance of payment deficit. The current account might be put in deficits where good imports could be exceeding exports. Or it could be that in the long run, uncontrolled changes or increases in money supply can cause increases in uncertainty and could cause a fall in the level of investment. It could also be that firms and households looking at the lucrative, cheaper interest rate might fall into too much debt and which might cause them trouble later wise. So the conclusion would be that increases in money supply depends on the situation or the state the economy is in. If it is in a recession, then it can stimulate growth by increasing money supply. But if the economy is in a full employment situation or it's operating at full capacity, then it will be leading towards inflation. So the government must manage the money supply carefully in order to promote economic growth or in order to increase investment levels and prevent the drawbacks in the form of inflation or in the form of current account deficit or in the form of creating uncertainty or making people and households fall in the debt trap. Get it? I hope it's clear. All right. Question number 4. Question number 4 talks about Nigeria. They say Nigeria has a mixed economic system. That means the public sector and the private sector. In January 2023, Nigeria had a high unemployment rate of 33%, which created a number of costs. High inflation rate was 22%, had several effects on the firms. In 2022 and the start of 2023, Nigerians increased their demand for foreign currency. So now they've given us an example of Nigeria. It was experiencing high inflation and high unemployment. Inflation was 22%. Unemployment was 33%, and what Nigerians had demanded was foreign currency. Now, they are asking us to identify 2 costs of unemployment. So, what are the drawbacks of unemployment? Identify 2 costs. So, just list down any 2. I mentioned a lot of them, just pick and write any 2 of them. You could say loss of output. Since now people are unemployed, so the output that would have been produced is not being produced. The country is not at its full potential, so it's a loss of output, a loss of income. Since people are unemployed, so the income they could have been enjoying, they aren't able to. Or it's a fall in the standard of living since now they are at the poverty level, they are having unemployment benefits, they are at the lower level of income, right? Or you could say they are operating inside the PPC again. Why? Because there are unused resources. Or unemployment means either you need to provide training or you need to spend more on unemployment benefits, right? So mention any two and you'll get full 2 marks. Part B, explain how the key resource allocation decisions are made in a mixed economic system. So now they are asking us how a mixed economic system decides upon what to produce, how to produce, and for whom to produce. So you would say about, it's a 4 mark question. So you'd say in a mixed economy, key resource allocation decisions are made both by the public and the private sector. And now you'll mention responsibilities fulfilled by each sector. So you'll say a private sector makes use of price mechanism to decide what, how, and for whom to produce. The private sector is driven by the motive of profit. Prices are determined by the market forces of demand and supply. The government and the public sector is responsible for the provision of merit goods, public goods, reduce negative externalities, and address market failures. Merit goods are what? Merit goods are goods which are more beneficial for the consumer than they think, and they would be underconsumed if it is left towards on the market forces, for instance, education and healthcare. Public goods are goods which have the characteristics of non-rivalry and non-excludability. That means that they need to be financed through taxes, for instance, defense or policing and flood control systems. So we know that these merit and public goods would not be provided by the private sector. So the public sector provides, and the public sector would also be responsible for imposing taxes, both direct and indirect, provide subsidies, impose maximum and minimum prices, thereby increasing public welfare. We could also give an example. For instance, UK is an example of a mixed economy in which the government is responsible for, let's say, for the provision of healthcare and education, while the private firms provide for other consumer goods in order to earn maximum profits. We mentioned that for 4 marks. Hope it's clear. Part C, analyze the causes for increase in the demand for foreign currency. Now you got to identify reasons why would there be a demand for foreign currency and what impacts would it have. So you could say foreign currency could be demanded for payment for imported goods and services. Maybe the country needs to pay for the provision of imported goods. Obviously, it needs to convert its domestic currency in order to make payments abroad, or in order to make use of higher interest rates. So maybe the citizens are trying to invest in higher interest rates in that country, or it could be they want to invest in the property or the foreign assets or stocks abroad, maybe because they're more lucrative and they find it attractive, or they want to send remittances abroad. So they are demanding foreign currency, or since in order to for the increased tourism and to pay for the tourism services, they need to convert their currency. Or maybe speculation. If people expect a foreign currency to appreciate, they may demand more of it in order to profit later. Or if the country has removed certain trade restrictions, so now the people and consumer are demanding more of foreign products. Or it could be that the government wants to increase its foreign reserves, so now it's converting more of its currency into that foreign currency. Mention any 4 of them, build upon it, and you'll get full 6 marks. Part D, discuss whether or not inflation will harm a country's firms. You could say yes, inflation could be harmful for a country's firms. Why? Because increased prices for raw materials or key ingredients would cause the prices for that goods and services of that particular country to increase. And as a result, it would also cause the wages to increase. So if the firms cannot pass on to that increase in prices in the form of higher prices, it might find it difficult to raise the prices of its goods. And rise in inflation would also be causing uncertainty. And as a result, there would be a fall in investment and the firms would find it difficult to expand, right? So the businesses will have their confidence being dipped international, and since the products of that country will get more expensive, so the goods and services of that country will lose its international competitiveness. As a result, its exports would be less demanded, so it will be less revenue. The country would then be earning. So exports would get then expensive and the imports would be relatively cheaper. Again, it would lead to what? A current account deficit. It would also be that the local firms would be then facing competition from the imported products. However, you could say that no, if prices rise faster, then costs or demand for their goods would, or if prices rise faster than costs or demand for their goods is price inelastic, then the inflation would not be harmful, but it will be beneficial because it will cause revenues to increase. Then you could say if the firms have stocks of goods already in the hand, so it might not cause demand pull inflation. Rather, it would be beneficial for them because then they'll be enjoying more profits. And it could be that maybe sales is increasing if they've got stock supplies, right? Or it could be that for firms, goods may still be cheaper. For some, it might still be cheaper. Or if the inflation is mild or anticipated, it may not be harmful. If the inflation is steady and the level of inflation is expected, so firms can plan and adjust their pricing and wages accordingly. So the conclusion would be that the overall impact would depend on the rate of inflation, how predictable the inflation was, and the specific circumstances the firms might gain. Some might gain, some might suffer. So it depends on the rate of inflation and how predictable it was. Let's look at question number 5, the final question. It says Finland is a high income country that usually has a higher value of exports than imports, and it has a strong commercial banking sector, which has increased its lending. In recent years, the country has an aging population, more than a quarter of its population aged over 65. 2022, Finland's government had a budget deficit, with government spending exceeding tax revenue. Now they say identify a difference between an export and an import. So you could mention any of these. One difference, you could say export is a good or services that is sold to another country. Import is a good or services that is purchased from other country. Or you could say export is a credit item in the country's BOP, whereas import is a debit item. Or you could say exports bring in money for the economy, whereas imports cause money to leave the economy. You can use any of these differences and you'll get full 2 marks. Part B says explain why commercial banks may increase their lending. It's a 4-mark question. Pick out any 2 reasons, build upon that, and you'll get full 4 marks. You could say commercial banks may increase their lending in order for increasing their deposits. Or you could say increase their funds for lending. Now, since they've got increased deposits, they've got more funds for lending. Or you could say now, since the central bank has increased its policy of quantitative easing, right? Quantitative easing, right? So it has reduced its reserve requirement. So now it has allowed banks to increase their lending, right? Or maybe now the people or the businesses are more optimistic about their future. So in order to take advantage of their fall in interest rates or to increase in economies of scale or to earn more profits and earn more interest, now the banks are lending more. Part C says analyze how aging population may affect a country's growth rate. So you could say it's a 6-mark question. You could say aging population can slow down economic growth rate of a country. Why? Because a fall in the size of the labor. Because since the population is aging, so a fall in the size of the labor force, because the population is of aging, so this means there would be a fall in the output level and there would be a fall in the productivity level. As a result, it would lead to a fall in the economic growth, and aging population would have outdated skills, or they would have lesser geographical and occupational mobility, which means again a fall in economic growth. Aging population would mean a higher dependency ratio, and the government would be spending more on healthcare and pensions and the provision of unemployment benefits. As a result, maybe the government has to impose more taxes or increase borrowing in order to provide for the provision of unemployment benefits or spend more on healthcare. So it might have less funds for economic development. Or you could say that aging population means the population would be less healthy and there would be more absenteeism from work, right? But it could be that having an aging population means that the working population would be more experienced, and this experience might be used in order to increase productivity or they might be able to provide training to the young workers. And aging population might have more savings, and as a result, they might also have more spending power. Final part D, discuss whether supply side policy measures will reduce the government's budget deficit. It's an 8-mark question. You could say yes, supply side policy measures increase overall economic growth and they increase the employment level. Why? Because they increase the productive capacity of the economy by improving efficiency, increasing the competitiveness, and providing incentives by increasing education and training. They increase the productivity, overall increase the income levels, increase the revenue by providing in deregulation and promoting privatization. It causes more revenue in the form of higher profits, or by imposing taxes. You could provide, the government would be spending less on unemployment benefits. As a result, the tax revenue is going to rise, right? But you could say that supply side policy measures might take time to implement. Why? Because training of workers require a lot of time, and improving infrastructure might not increase output levels. Or you could say that a fall in taxes or increasing subsidies or spending on infrastructure might increase the deficit, right? In the short term. If economic outlook is negative, or if the consumers do not have confidence, so the supply side policies would be ineffective. Regulations also involve costs, and sale of firms might result in loss of revenue. So the conclusion would be that having the potential to decrease a government's budget deficit. Supply side policies have the potential to reduce a government's budget deficit in the long term. It might lead to increase in economic growth and revenue, but they may not be effective in the short term. For the short term, the supply side policies might not be effective, but and they might increase the budget deficit in the short term, but in the long term, yes, they can increase to economic growth and increase in revenue. I hope it's clear and you've enjoyed solving this paper with me. Stay tuned, subscribe. I'll be back with more such questions. Happy learning.